All right. Hello. We are going to talk today about rounding decimals. There is no difference between rounding decimals and rounding whole numbers. It's kind of the exact same thing. So they're going to show you today how to use a number line to do it. And that is awesome. And so we will learn using a number line. We also can revert to our old Mrs. Poppelmeyer trick, which works just as well with decimals as it does for whole numbers. So you'll have two different tools in your tool belt. You can use a number line, or you can use the Mrs. Poppelmeyer trick. And again, one of the things I like about math, it's kind of the same thing I like about clay, is that there are a lot of different paths to get to the same endpoint. And so you can take your own path and explore. And that's what I like about math, is that usually there's a couple or maybe even 3 or 4 ways to get an answer, and you get to choose which way you like to find the answer. So in this instance, we're going to have number lines, and we'll also have the Mrs. Poppelmeyer trick. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to screen share my paper, which I have already folded into 8 squares. It's a little hard to see, but you can kind of see the folds. So I'm going to go ahead and once I make the lights come back on, hello. It's getting like more, I have to be more and more aggressive to get the motion sensor to turn on the lights. All right, so we are doing math lesson. I'm writing my name in the corner, and we're doing lesson number 7.4. And today we're going to do pages 38 through 41. Okay. So they're going to show us in the book how to use a number line to round numbers. We're going to be looking at a number line, and we're going to be looking at which end of the number line the number is closest to, if that makes sense. And here's a number line for us to look at. So Dion's height is 83 hundredths of a meter. Round 83 hundredths of a meter to the nearest tenth of a meter. So if I have a number line, and this is showing me tenths, right? If I pretended and had a little 0 here, that would be 80 hundredths, 85 hundredths. This would be 90 hundredths, right? And so if I have 83, this is how tall Dion is, and we're going to round it to the nearest tenth. So is it closer to 9 tenths or 8 tenths? 83 hundredths equals 8 tenths and 3 hundredths. 83 hundredths is between 8 tenths and 9 tenths. It's nearer to 8 tenths, right? You can see that it's nearer than to 9 tenths. To round to the nearest tenth, look at the hundreds digit. Since it is less than 5, round down. So 83 hundredths of a meter rounded to the nearest tenth is 8 tenths. Okay? Also, we could have used the Mrs. Poppelmeyer trick, gotten the exact same answer, and it might have been faster. This is just kind of walking you through the thought process. Now we're going to round 1 75 hundredths to the nearest tenth. So I have 1.7 or 1 7 tenths. I have 1.8 or 1 8 tenths. This is the halfway point, right? Pretend there's an imaginary 0 on there and it's 1.70, 1.70, and this is 1.80. So this would be the halfway point, 1.75. So we know that if a 5 is involved in rounding, it's always going to round up. It's going to be closer to the number that is rounded up. So 1 and 75 hundredths is halfway between 1 and 7 tenths and 1 and 8 tenths. Since the hundredths digit is 5, round up. So we're always going to round up, which means we're going to the larger number. So 1 and 75 hundredths rounded to the nearest tenth is 1 and 8 tenths. Right? That makes sense to everyone. And the number line makes it really easy for you to see, to visualize. That's one of the reasons why number lines are used a lot with rounding, because it's very visual. You can see very easily. All right, let's look at this next problem. Round 2 and 98 hundredths to the nearest tenth. So again, this would be the same thing as 2.90. 2 and 90 hundredths, 2 and 95 hundredths, 3 and no hundredths, right? It would be 3.00. So 2 and 98 hundredths is going to be closer to 3, whole number 3, right? So 2.98 is between 2.9 and 3. It is nearer to 3 than to 2.9. Since the hundredths digit is greater than 5, round up. So this 8 means that we're rounding up. So 2 and 98 hundredths rounded to the nearest tenth is 3, whole number 3. I keep calling it 3 and no tenths, but it's just whole number 3. Whole number 3 is written as 3.0 to 1 decimal place. Okay? So we'll do 5, 6, and 7. And this is an activity, a hands-on activity we'd normally do in class. You would have a measuring tape, and you don't have a measuring tape at your house that I know of. You might have one out in the garage, but we normally do all of these hands-on things in class, but we're going to skip it because I'm not sure you have measuring tapes. I didn't give you one. So we'll do 5, 6, and 7, and then we're going to look on the next page. We're going to talk a little bit about this, and then we'll do, I think we're doing 41, right? So we'll do this page, and that'll be pretty easy to do. That's all we have to do, okay? All right, so let's look at these first few problems. So for each decimal, draw a number line. Mark X to show where the decimal is located. I'm even going to use colored pencil and make my X green, just like the book. All right, so here's an example. 3 and 43 hundredths. We're rounding it to the nearest tenth. So that means we're going to have 3.4 and 3.5. So then we're going to put the 3.43 goes on here. We show it where it's at. And then we're going to say what it's closest to. Is it closer to 3.4 or 3.5? And the answer is 3.4. All right, so we're going to do number 5. Got my colored pencil ready, and I'm going to use my ruler again going this way because I think it's a little bit easier. Gives me a little bit more room. And also we're going to do 5, 6, and 7. So I'm going to draw my lines on in advance just because I can. I might pull out a little bit, and so I'm pulling away a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Oh, come on, autofocus. There we go. That was auto unfocus. All right, so I'm just drawing my lines in advance because I know that I'm going to need a line for number 5, number 6, and number 7. So I'm prepared with my lines. Okay, number 5 is asking us to round 36 hundredths. So if I know I have this, and they're asking us to round to the nearest tenth, I'm going to have 0.3, right? Or 0.4. So if I look at this in terms of hundredths, I know that I would be looking between 30 and 40. So this is going to be And if you put a little imaginary 0 on there in your head, right, you can kind of see my imaginary 0 now. It's just really light. And this is going to be 0.4. And again, I'm putting my little imaginary 0 on there. So the halfway point between those two is going to be 35, right? 30, 40, 35 is the middle. So if I am trying to figure this out with my where it's located and I have my green X, 3600ths is going to be right here. So it's going to be closer to 4/10, right? So my answer is 4/10. That's what it's closest to. Okay. Kind of makes sense. What I think really helps is if you put the imaginary 0 on the end, then it helps you figure it out. They're asking you to round to the nearest 10th, and we're making it into 100th so that we can tell what we're doing, right? Okay, here we go. Here's our next one. This time we have 2 and 32 hundredths. So I'm going to have a halfway point, I'm going to have a starting point, and I'm going to have an end point. Now, here's the hardest part of this problem is figuring out what you're putting on the start and the end. So if I would probably say this 32 is between 30 and 40, right? So I'm going to call this 2.3 with my little magical 0 there. And this is going to be 2.4 with my invisible 0. That one's a little less invisible and more visible. So between 2.3 and 2.4 is going to be 2.35, right? Because if I put my 0 here, this is 30, this is 40, and 35 is the halfway point. So if 2 and 32 hundredths would be right about here, right? So I know it's going to be closer to 2.3 or 2 and 3/10. Okay, these are kind of fun. Maybe I will like this better than the Mrs. Poppelmeyer trick. Nah. Nah. Okay. Our last one is probably going to be hard because they're good at making things difficult when it's the last one. So I have 4 and 5 hundredths. So if I'm looking to see, and I'm looking at tenths, I would probably say between 4.0 and 4.1. And again, you can put the invisible 0 on here. So it becomes from 0 to 10, right? 0 to 10. And this is going to be right in the middle, right? The middle point's going to be 4.05. We would have 4.01, 4.02, 4.03, 4.04, 4.05, 4.06, 4.07, 4.08, 4.09, 4.10, right? So again, if you don't have to put these on here, but they kind of help me. I like putting them on there because I get confused between tenths and hundredths. And so if I just make everything consistent, if I make it, it's all going to be hundredths. And except for my answer. My answer is not going to be hundredths. I'm going to get rid of the special helper 0, the invisible 0. So 4.05 is right in the middle, the monkey in the middle. So what am I going to do if it's in the middle? I round up, right? If middle means I round up. So it's going to be 4 and 1/10 4 and 10 hundredths, but 4 and 1/10. Okay. Okie dokies. I'm putting my colored pencil back for now. I'm flipping over to the next page. And let's look at, let's look at number 1 on Let's Practice. Okay. So I'm going to turn my page. Beep, 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 beep. And I'm going to look at number 1. So I'm going to round 24 hundredths to the nearest tenth. So we're doing the exact same thing. And we're going to answer all of these green box questions. Okay. Because we only have 3 problems, what we might do is go like this with our paper and do 1 here. So we'll do number 1 here. Give ourselves lots of room. Number 2 here. And then on the back, we'll do number 3. Okay. Give ourselves plenty of room. So let's look at number 1. We have a number line for starters. So I'm going to draw the number line up here at the top. And my number line says I have a middle number, I have an end number, and a beginning number. And this says 2/10. This says 3/10. And this says this. And I'm going to draw the points in. I was lazy before and I didn't draw all the little spikes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Now it says that this is what we're looking at right here. We're looking at 0.24, 24 hundredths. And again, if you're struggling a little bit like I do, I like to see, if I'm dealing with hundredths, I want to see all hundredths. So we can call this 20 hundredths. This is 25 hundredths. This is 30 hundredths, right? 20, 25, 30. Just because we have decimals doesn't mean that we're not following the same rules that numbers always follow. For some reason, I lost my screen share here. Let's see if I can get it back. Oh, I know what happened. My camera popped off. I unplugged it. Hang on just a second. It'll come back on. All right. So just because we're dealing with decimals doesn't mean that decimals don't follow the same rules that all numbers follow, right? That whole numbers follow. And sorry about that. I think I kicked the plug loose. It takes a little while for it to turn back on. Okay, now it's turned back on. You got to hear my beautiful singing. Let's try again. We'll share, stop share, and then we'll try again. Screen share. Here we go. Come on, camera. Come on, camera. Oh, no, it's not going to let me do this. Let's see if it'll switch cameras. Aha! It will let me switch cameras. Good. Okay, because I don't want to start filming this over again. So then it says, it has some sentences and it says 24 hundredths is between green box and green box. And then it says 24 hundredths is nearer to green box than to green box. And then it says 24 hundredths There we go. 24 hundredths rounded to the nearest tenth is green box. Okay, so again, this is just sort of teaching you how to think. That's what I really like about this math program is it disciplines you to teach you how to logically step by step solve a problem. And that's a good thing. I know it's a pain to write that out and it feels kind of silly to write it out, probably for some of you, but it's really teaching you how to think. And that's a good thing in math. It's teaching you the path that your brain should travel. So this is our X right here. And so we're looking at, the green kind of helps us to see where we're at. Oh, I messed up. I put it on the wrong spot. This is going to be 25. Let's pretend that's 25. So this is going to be between 0.2 and 0.3. Sorry, I put it on the halfway point. It should go one down. And 24 hundredths is nearer to, it's going to be closer to 2/10 than to 3/10. So 24 hundredths rounded to the nearest tenth is 2/10. All right. Okay, let's look at number 2. This time they don't have the number line drawn for us, so we're going to draw our own number line, and I'm not going to mess it up this time. I swear. I swear. Okay, so this time we're rounding 5 and 17 hundredths. So that means we're going to have to go between 5.1 and 5.2. Again, if you need to draw in the little imaginary zeros here to make it into a hundredth, that's what I do in my head. I'm saying, hey, 17 is between 10 and 20. Here's my middle point. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And my middle point right here, which I'm going to make really big so I don't mess up again, like I did last time. So my middle point between 10 and 20 is going to be 15. So it's going to be 5 and 15 hundredths. Okay. If I want to find 5 and 17 hundredths, that's going to be right here. So it's going to be closer to 5.2 or 5 and 2/10. So we're going to write our sentences out. It says 5 and 17 hundredths is between green box and then it gives us a little tease and tells us 5.2. 5 and 17 hundredths is nearer to green box than to green box. So we're going to say that it's nearer to 5.2 than to 5.1 or 5 and 1/10, right? It's closer to 5 and 2/10 than 5 and 1/10. All right. And then we're going to say that 5 and 17 hundredths rounded to the nearest tenth green box. And that green box is going to have 5 and 2/10 in it. So we're just sort of learning how to think logically, right? We're using the number line as a springboard to see which tenth the number that's 100th is closer to. Okay. All right. Now we're going to make a little chart and let's try the Poppelmeier trick. Okay. So I'm giving you my oh dear hands because I want you to learn how to do it both ways. And then I want you to be able to pick which you like better. Some people might like the number line. Some people might like the Mrs. Poppelmeier trick. So we have a chart right here. And the chart looks like this. It says it has a line down here, and it has a line down here, and then it has a line that goes this way, and then it has a little one going this way. So I'm just looking at this pink little chart right here that's in my math book. So this part says rounded to the nearest. This part is split in half, and this says whole number. I'm going to make the number sign, and then this is tenth, and this says decimal. Okay, and then we have, these are going to be blank, and we're going to fill them in. They have green boxes in them. And then over here we have 3 49/100ths. And then we have 4 85/100ths. Okay, so this is all set up for us to use the Poppelmeier trick. So we're going to start out with the first one, 3 49/100ths. And I'm going to zoom in just a little smidgy. All right, so we're going to start out with this 3 49/100ths. Now we want to round to the nearest whole number. The whole number is the 3, right? It's the number in the ones place. So we're going to put our line under the whole number, and we're going to put a box around our neighbor. Our neighbor's in the tenths place. If this number is 5 or greater, we add 1 to this. But it's not, it's less than 5. So this stays the same. This becomes, the box becomes my hero, 0. All numbers become 0. So this, the rounded to the nearest whole number, is 3.0. Does make sense to everybody? Now we're going to round it to the nearest tenth. So we're going to take 3 49/100ths. Which number is in the tenths place? 4. So we find the tenths place. Who is my neighbor? Neighbor's always to the right. So that 9 goes in the box. 9 is definitely greater than 5. So that means we're going to come over here and we're going to add 1 to that tenth. And it becomes 5/10. This stays the same, right? This doesn't, whatever we're doing doesn't affect this at all. This box becomes, everything in the box becomes a 0, and everything to the right of the box becomes a 0. So the box becomes my hero, 0. Now it's asking us to do it to the nearest tenth. So we're not going to put the 0 there. We're just going to call it 3 5/10, not 3 50/100ths. They're the same thing, but we're just leaving the 0 off. So we're going to call it 3.5 or 3 5/10, right? Okay. That was for the first part. Now we're going to do 4 85/100. So again, we're finding the nearest whole number. The whole number is the 4. Our box goes around the neighbor. If the number in the box is 5 or higher, we add 1. So 4 plus 1 is 5. My box becomes the 0, my hero 0, and everything to the right becomes a 0. So they're not asking us for hundredths. They're saying closest whole number. So I'm going to call it 5.0. Or you could even just write 5. But because we're working with decimals, I put the 0.0 there. So the closest whole number is 5. All right, now we're going to deal with tenths. So we have the same number. Which number is in the tenths place? This 8 is. So I'm going to put my line under the 8. My box goes around the neighbor, right? And if the number in this box is 5 or greater, then we add 1. So this becomes a 9. The 4 stays the same, and the decimal, they stay the same. And then this box becomes my hero 0. In this case, because we're looking for the nearest tenth, we're not going to put the 0 because that would be the nearest hundredth, 90th, 90 hundredths. It's the same thing with the 0 or without the 0, but because they're asking for the 10th, nearest 10th, I'm just going to leave the 0 off. So I'm going to call it 4.9, otherwise known as 4 9/10 when I say it properly. Okay, so there are 2 different methods for you to round decimals. One is to use a number line. The other one is to use the Mrs. Poppelmeyer trick, find the place value that they're going to round to. They always tell you, math books tell you the number you're rounding to. If you're in a real world situation and you're doing rounding in the real world, which I round all the time in the real world. When I'm shopping, if I'm in the grocery store and I say, hey, I'm going to buy this. It's $3.49, but I only have $4. Do I have enough? Or I have $3.50. Do I have enough? And so I go ahead. I must yell. I go ahead. She's looking at me like I'm talking to myself. So I round all the time. When you're shopping, especially, you're rounding with decimals. And when you walk in with cash in your pocket and you want to buy a bunch of things and you aren't sure if you have enough, then you do quick rounding in your head so that you are able to buy what you can buy. So it's up to you which method you want to use. I kind of prefer the Mrs. Poppelmeyer trick because the number line is requiring me to jump from tenths to hundredths, and that's a little confusing for me. But that might not be confusing for you. So you have to choose which you feel most comfortable with and then go for it. All right. So thank you for joining me. I hope that this helped you with rounding, and I hope that you enjoyed doing rounding because it's kind of fun. All right. I will talk to you later.